Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is defrost. Let's take a moment to look at some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The first way you might hear defrost used is to mean to remove frost or ice from the windshield of a motor vehicle. So you can see the root word frost, F-R-O-S-T, in this particular definition. And this is how we were talking about this particular word in one of my classes. So we were talking about how to drive safely in winter conditions. So when there is ice, when there is snow. You might think of frost that kind of covers your windshield. So it might not be thick, it might not be deep like snow, but many times it's this thin layer. And we need to remove it in order to be able to see out a vehicle in order to drive. So this prefix de many times is going to mean off. And so that really connects to this particular definition here. So we're getting the frost or ice off of the windshield. A second way you hear this verb used is to mean to thaw frozen foods. So if thaw is a new word for you, essentially we're going from a frozen state to a non-frozen state. That's really what that means. And then a third way you'll hear defrost used is to mean to get rid of or free the inside of a refrigerator or a freezer of ice that has sort of built up inside of it. You should know that defrost is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, all I need to do is add ing to form defrosting. The past tense and participle forms of this verb can be made by just adding ed. Our base verb defrost ends with a T sound. So when we add the ed ending for our past tense and participle forms of this verb, we're going to add an extra syllable as we say it. So it should sound like this: defrosted, defrosted. Okay. Now, there aren't any additional phrasal verbs that we need to study with this particular verb. So instead, we can focus on practicing our verb of the day in a couple different verb tenses. Today, we're going to practice the simple present and the simple future. Let's start with the simple present. We use this verb tense to describe habits and routines, so an action that repeats at a regular interval. Okay? But we also use it to talk about facts. So the thing to remember about the simple present is that we need to pay attention to our subject. If our subject is I, you, we, or they, we're just going to use the base verb in the affirmative. But if our subject is he, she, or it, we need to add an S to the end of the verb. Okay, you can see that in my example sentence. This button defrosts the windshield. Okay, so someone might be driving a car for the first time. Someone else is pointing out different features. They're indicating if you push this button, right, it will remove the frost or ice from the windshield. Okay. We're using the simple present here because that would be a factual statement. And because I'm just talking about one button, you see that S on the end of my verb. Now let's talk about negative simple present sentences. To do this, again, we need to pay attention to our subject. If our subject is I, you, we, or they, we're going to use do not and then the base verb. But if the subject is he, she, or it, we'll use does not and then the base verb. Notice in the negative, I'm not adding an S to the end of the verb. Never going to do it, okay? Now, let's take a look at a negative simple present sentence. We don't defrost things with hot water. It can partially cook the food and change its taste. Okay? So I borrowed this sentence a little bit from some cooking instructions someone else was giving. So they were talking about kind of steps and encouraging people and saying kind of like at our restaurant, right? This is sort of a negative habit. We do not defrost things by putting them under hot water. And then they went on to explain why. Now, Let's take a look at making a yes or no question in the simple present. To do this, we start with do or does, then we have our subject, and then the base verb. So again, I'm never adding an S to the end of the verb in my yes or no question. Here's an example. Do you defrost this before putting it in the oven? Okay. This could be any number of things, but you might think of asking this question of someone who's maybe teaching you to cook a particular dish. Now, let's talk about the simple future. You know there are many different ways to talk about future actions in English. Today, we're going to focus on using be going to talk about the future. This is really common when people discuss their plans. You might also hear it sometimes as people make predictions for the future. And the thing about this form of the simple future is that I need to pay attention to my subject. Okay, so my form of be is going to change based on what the subject is. If my subject is I'll use am, then going to, and then the base verb. But if my subject is he, she, or it, I'll use is, going to, and then the base verb. Finally, if my subject is you, we, or they, I'm going to use are, then going to, and the base verb. Okay? You can see this in my affirmative example. This trick is going to defrost your windshield in seconds. Okay? This particular statement, someone was making, I think, trying to convince someone to use their particular technique or maybe kind of follow some type of video. You probably see things like this on YouTube, right? Trying to kind of pull you in to get you to watch. Okay. Now, if I want to make a negative simple future sentence using be going to, again, my structure will be subject, and then the form of be that matches, then not, then going to, and the base verb. Here's another example. I'm not going to defrost the freezer before we leave on vacation. Right? So this would very much be a plan. Someone is saying, I am not doing this thing before we leave town, right? And finally, we can make a yes or no question in the simple future. To do this, we start with our form of be, whatever form matches our subject, and the subject comes next. Then we use going to and the base verb. Here's another example. Are you going to defrost the turkey in the refrigerator? Right. So here I might be asking one's plans. And I think this is a recommended tip if someone has, or I should say buys a frozen turkey. Many times it's recommended you put it in the refrigerator a few days before you plan to cook it so that it can thaw. It tends to be very heavy, and so once it's frozen, it is very solid, and one can't defrost it very quickly. Now, let's take a moment to look at just one word today that is related to our verb defrost. And the word we're going to look at today is the noun defroster. I hope you see that suffix, the ER, that's been added on to our root. So generally when we see this, we're thinking a person or thing that defrosts something. And generally, when you hear this used, you're going to hear people referring to devices that are in vehicles that are meant to sort of get rid of that ice or frost. So perhaps you'll be in a car and someone might say, please turn on the defroster, right? So they want you to use that particular device in order to usually better see out the windshield. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.